This is the second half of the evening. This is my show, I, Nephi, a gay Mormon survival guide. This is something I've been working on for the past several months, since last spring. And this tonight will actually be the first time I read it out loud in its entirety. So I'm very glad that you'll be here with me for that. I would just like you to keep in mind that afterwards, I would love for all of you, or any of you to stay for a talk back. What I'm doing tonight is a staged reading. It's not a full performance. There will be aspects of performance, but not a full performance. And that is because I'm interested in your feedback. I want to see what works and what doesn't. I want to see what lands and what doesn't. And so I would like you to keep that in mind while you watch this evening. To let me know what you think of the show. So I'd like to take a quick moment to thank the professors, Dr. Cherry, Dr. Mills, and Professor Abbott, and Dr. Watson, and Cody, our tech director, and all of his S workers who did amazing work setting all this up. AJ and Corey for helping run tech back there, and Patrick up here for helping me read. Patrick tonight will be serving as my stage manager. He'll be reading stage directions for me. So anytime he is speaking, it will be kind of the more technical aspects of what's happening on stage. So, without further ado, I will be reading from a script. I apologize. And I will be using some props. But I would like to begin. I need mine.
Enter Joe, dressed very much like a Mormon, with the Book of Mormon in hand. Takes center stage, opens the book to the first page.
The first verse of the first chapter of the Book of Mormon. I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, therefore I was taught somewhat in all the learning of my father, and having seen many afflictions in the course of my days, nevertheless, having been highly favored of the Lord in all my days, yea, having had a great knowledge of the goodness and the mysteries of God, therefore I make a record of my proceedings in my days. And so begins the holy book of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a record of the ancient peoples of the Americas and their encounters with God and Jesus Christ. You see, around the year 600 BCE, Jerusalem was about to be destroyed. But before it is, God visits a man named Lehi in a dream and warns him to flee the impending doom. God leads Lehi and his family west, instructs Lehi's son Nephi on how to build a couple of boats, and then safely delivers this family across the Atlantic all the way to the Americas. Lehi's sons, Nephi and Laman, would go on to give rise to two rivaling civilizations that populated these lands and kept a record of all the events that transpired over about 800 years, including Jesus Christ's visit to the Nephites after his resurrection. Now, some of you might be thinking right now, wait a minute, so you're telling me that ancient Jews populated the Americas, and that the Mormon Bible is a history of the Native Americans, and that Jesus visited them? Listen, I know that sounds a little crazy. Maybe it'd help if we go back to the source. Where did this book come from? Who wrote it? Where did he even get that idea? Well, this all starts with a young boy named Joseph Smith in upstate New York in the year 1820. Young Joseph was born into a time of religious upheaval. Dozens of preachers blazed through his hometown, each proclaiming a different version of Christianity. Catholics claimed Christ's presence in the Eucharist. Protestants swore that only faith would grant you salvation, and the Puritans claimed only an elect few would be saved, and that all others would be condemned to hell. There were dozens of denominations, each claiming to be the true gospel of Jesus Christ. Joseph and his family attended revivals and Sunday services. They frequently read the Bible. But for all this immersion in the Christian faith, Joseph found himself seriously confused. So he decided to go directly to the source. He decided to find a place in the woods by himself where he could go to pray.
Shift to the sacred grove, washes of green and birds chirping. Joe takes center stage, opens the book, and reads. The following passage will be accompanied by lighting and sound effects to match the action. Lights will fade and a rumbling sound effect will grow as the power increases. And there will be a sudden light shift with the theophany.
After I had retired to the place where I had previously designed to go, having looked around me and finding myself alone, I kneeled down and began to offer up the desires of my heart to God. I had scarcely done so when immediately I was seized upon by some power which entirely overcame me and had such an astonishing influence over me as to bind my tongue so that I could not speak. Thick darkness gathered around me, and it seemed to me for a time as if I were doomed to sudden destruction. But exerting all my powers to call upon God to deliver me out of the power of this enemy which had seized upon me, and at the very moment when I was ready to sink into despair and abandon myself to destruction, not to an imaginary ruin, but to the power of some actual being from the unseen world who had such marvelous power as I had never before felt in any being, just at this moment of great alarm, I saw a light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. No sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air. And one of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other, "This is my beloved Son. Hear him."
Shift away from the sacred grove.
Holy shit! I mean, come on, that's pretty cool, right? I mean, as far as religious theophanies go, it's right up there with the best of them. It's all there. Religious confusion, a crisis of faith, the appearance of God. It's at least as cool as Paul getting struck blind on the road to Damascus. Or Muhammad having the Quran revealed to him during the night of power. I should probably introduce myself at this point, right? I've just told you a crazy story, and I'm going on up here about Mormonism, and you have no idea who I am. And that's an easy fix. My name is Joseph Mount, and I was born and raised a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A Mormon. Yeah, one of those. Now, usually when people learn this fact about me, their eyes go a bit wide, and they follow up with all sorts of questions. So to save us time, I'll go ahead and answer them. No, I'm not from Utah. No, I didn't grow up with multiple moms. Yes, I drank Coke. No, I don't wear the infamous magic underwear, and I never went on that 2-year mission with a bike helmet and a little name tag. And yes, I'm aware that I share my name with good old Joseph Smith. I asked my dad once if I was named after the Mormon founder, and this was his response. No! Yeah, the jury's still on that one, so just to be safe, go ahead and call me Joe. Growing up in the Mormon church, I always knew we were a little bit different. Maybe even a little bit weird. But I was under the distinct impression that being a little peculiar was a good thing. As far as I was concerned, being normal wasn't all that a great thing to be. In the church, I had new and exciting scriptures, a living prophet of God, a religious community dedicated to supporting and ensuring each other's progression in faith. My entire family belonged to this church, and we worked tirelessly to increase God's kingdom on earth. That was all before I left the church when I turned 18. We'll get to that in a bit. Now, I've never actually been to the Sacred Grove, that place in New York where Joseph Smith claimed to have had his first vision. Now, as you can imagine, it's a pretty holy place for the Mormons. Now, I've never been to the Sacred Grove, but I have been to Nauvoo, Illinois. That's where Joseph Smith began founding his own Zion, and where Mormons built the first temple. And today, it's one of those old-timey tourist places where you can see how butter was made back in the day, or visit a real-life blacksmith. And I've walked through Adam-on-Diamond, the ancient site of the Garden of Eden, and the location of the return of Jesus Christ in the last days, in Jackson County, Missouri. I've even been to Liberty Jail, where Joseph Smith was gunned down by an angry mob. Stood on the same spot where the prophet fell to his death from a second-story window after watching his brother shot dead. But never the Sacred Grove. And that's really where it all began. After that first theophany of God and Jesus Christ, Joseph goes through a series of visions, ultimately being led to a place on a hillside where the angel Moroni directs him to the buried golden plates, which Joseph went on to translate into what we now know as the Book of Mormon. Now, according to Moroni, these plates were a record of the native peoples of the Americas, their history, their heritage, records of war and passing of kings, but most importantly, it contained the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this wasn't the gospel that had been passed down over 2,000 years, and it had been interpreted and corrupted by imperfect men that was found in the Bible. No, this was the original gospel of Jesus when he visited the Americas, specifically preserved by God, so that his ordained prophet could restore the true church to the earth for these latter days. All Joseph needed to do now was to translate.
Joe moves to a table stage left in the doorway and sits. On the table are a hat, 2 stones, and a book wrapped in cloth. As Joe describes the following action, he performs it.
Only 1 stone. So we're told that the plates were written in Reformed Egyptian. So Joseph was given 2 seer stones that would help him translate this book into English. So he would take the stones and he put them into a hat, like this one. And then he would put his face into the hat and translate.
Joe takes his face out of the hat.
Now there was always a scribe with him, so they'd be the ones taking down what Joseph would read, translate.
Joe goes back and forth between putting his face in the hat and looking at the wrapped up golden plates. Finally looks at the audience.
Yeah, I found that to be a little weird too.
Joe moves down the stage away from the table.
The funny thing is, I didn't learn about this until after I left the church. There's actually quite a bit more I learned after leaving about my own church's history than that I never would have learned in Sunday school. Because Sunday school wasn't so much about church history as it was the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, if there's one thing you learn as a Mormon, it's the gospel. It permeates throughout your entire life, giving your perception a distinctly Mormon tint. Now, this isn't your once on Easter and Christmas religion. The Mormon faith demands you take it seriously. God first in all things. So at the height of my church activity, I was attending an hour of scripture study before school every day. Monday nights were meant for gospel study with family home evening. Wednesday nights were dedicated to youth night in the church building. Once a month, you'd go on visiting teaching lessons to other members' homes, and you'd receive at least one visit yourself. Scouting with the other boys from church camp in the summer, temple visits during the month, and then your personal responsibilities from church callings. Then, of course, 3 hours of church every Sunday with meetings after. My dad was called to serve as bishop's counselor on more than one occasion. My mom served in leadership positions in Relief Society. I was called more than once to preside over the other boys my age as priesthood quorum president. When I turned 12, I was ordained into the Aaronic priesthood, the authority and power to act in God's name upon the face of the earth. I could baptize, administer the redemptive sacrament of the Eucharist, and even have the authority to call upon angels for protection. And as priesthood quorum president, it was my duty to oversee the spiritual well-being of the other boys my age, under the guidance of the bishop. By all accounts, I was on track to go on a mission, marry a nice Mormon girl in the temple, and go on to serve the church and God happily for the rest of my life. But there was something that just never quite fit during my life as a Mormon. There's always this feeling of being uncomfortable. Like this life that I was living was great and all, but there was something not me about it. I learned pretty early on what that thing was. That thing that was making me feel positively not Mormon. I'm gay.
And whoa, turn it off. Like the lights reach the beach ball. My heteroside just won. I'm all better now. Boys should be with girls as Heavenly Father's planned. So if you ever feel you'd rather be with a man, turn it off.
That is from Matt Stone and Trey Parker's Book of Mormon musical. Talking about a